Hi, for giving me my cards. They are my safety blanket, so let me get through this. So my talk tonight is the case for the generalist, and specifically this is in regards to art. My name is Alicia Andrew. Wait, let me do that first. I've been in the game industry for roughly 9 years. In that time, I've been everything from a concept artist to texture artist, UI, art director, and finally studio director. I've had the opportunity to work with a wide variety of artists on a range of projects, some good, some bad, and some epically awful. In that time, I've had to learn everything the hard way: how to read a contract, how to not work for free, the value of a good team, how to take joy in a project that's not going to succeed, and how to take pride in a project that's perhaps not the best. I've carved a weird niche for myself, mostly due to my problem solving and my core art skills, and I'm not the only one. And I've come to believe that we as artists, to stay working and competitive in industry this competitive, as it's changing with areas growing and markets expanding, we need to take a step back and reevaluate those areas we're focusing on. Wait, let me go back. All right, so for the purpose of this talk, when we're discussing what a generalist or a specialist is, it's important that we're on the same page, hence the description. Now, in an industry of large-scale art or large-scale studios, it makes sense to have teams, art teams, primarily comprised of specialists. It harks back to a large-scale assembly line mentality. But if we're discussing studios in small or the medium range, generalists will tend to be more beneficial from a project to a project in terms of budget and pipeline. This is because they have a strong foundation and the mentality necessary to adapt. They also understand how to problem solve when presented with new subject matters, styles, and software. I believe we are seeing a growth and robustness in industries that intentionally or unintentionally place a value on something called fluid intelligence. Fluid intelligence involves being able to think and reason abstractly and solve problems. It's what we use when we tackle novel problems. It's the ability to perceive relationships independent of previous specific practice or instructions concerning those relationships. Not surprisingly, generalists exhibit skills that correlate to strengths in fluid intelligence. Now, so we're clear, a generalist is not someone who must master every software or technique or occupy every role within a game art team, but rather a strong artist with a skill set in problem solving. They do well in novel situations, are usable in multiple roles, and are comfortable branching out. The strength of the generalist lies in their adaptability. Conversely, a specialist will typically be stronger in any one particular area. With increased efficiency and experience with specific software and techniques, the weaknesses are they're expensive, oftentimes unwilling or unable to branch out, and their greatest strength also dictates their area of usefulness. Both sides need to work together in a successful art team, but right now we're drowning in a sea of specialists, with the odd generalist clinging to whatever life raft they can get. So, not to bring us down, but there are some harsh truths we need to consider when looking at our individual careers. The burnout rate used to be something like 10 years, and now I think it's something closer to 5. Even if you make it past that magical 10-year mark, there's no guarantee that you're going to continue working in an industry this competitive. It's getting increasingly expensive to keep staff between active projects, and we operate in an industry that tends to value profit over creativity. Our studios often carry high operating costs with very little profit, and almost no backup funds if things go badly. During the last 2 years, we've seen the results of poorly developed business models over scope and the changing dynamics of our industry. The bar for quality has increased, and as a result, we feel a growing pressure to specialize or narrow our skill sets. This is due to a variety of factors. Lack of time, we have families, burn, and stiff competition have all contributed to it. In such a competitive field, it makes a certain amount of sense to find a niche or fulfill a specific need. Studios want to introduce to specialists, find how useful it is to have that highly skilled person take charge of that particular task. This in turn becomes part of a studio shopping list when tooling up new art teams. We've seen the shift in the past in our industry from generalists to specialists as studios grew and logically harvested models from our sister industry film. This system, built on specialization, works well when we are dealing with large teams capable of housing a high volume of artists. But while we need specialists, they shouldn't comprise the bulk of our workforce. This is neglecting a set of skills that will benefit art teams and products. I believe we're training ourselves and the next generation of game artists for job roles I believe will become less relevant in the next few years. We are watching a move from an assembly line mentality to a more collaborative and problem-solving workforce. The closer to an assembly line we pressure our art pipelines, the easier it becomes to outsource it. So, because I believe our industry is changing under our feet, it's also hard to view it objectively. One way to counter this is to take a step outside and look at what's happening in other industries. There's a great deal of new research that's showing that many new industries are changing due to outdated workforce models. Clay Shirky argued in his talk, Institution versus Collaboration, that we are in the middle of a transition from older, institutionalized frameworks to a more collaborative and cooperative framework of interacting and doing business, that we're looking at a massive readjustment in the ways that we do business. I believe we're beginning to see the beginnings of large growth in smaller scope games. Now, by smaller scope, I don't mean scope in regards to story, art integrity, or technical, but rather resources. An underlying thread in many recent articles, talks, videos, research is this very simple idea of return on investment. This is one of the cornerstones of bootstrapping a project. This idea that every component has an X value to it, and it must be evaluated before being implemented. This mindset that everything is weighed is what I think is allowing mid and small developers to see growth, while large studios are dealing with overscoped projects and market fatigue. Scope is important when we're discussing art because it's one of the easiest areas to see balloon past a reasonable volume. I think intelligent control of scope is inherently easier in smaller teams due to visibility, budget constraints, etc. And I also think that control of scope will be one of the major impacts on the types of studios we see successfully thriving. So, my point. So this talk generated from a frustration in both the hiring process for artists and an observation of new education programs. Specifically, when we're talking about education, there seems to be an increased pressure to learn and teach the newest plugin, software, shiny plugin, but a distinct and resounding lack of explanation or emphasis on the foundation that needs to exist before you crack open that $5,000 piece of software. There are some tactics I believe we should be exploring with education. We need to move away from software-specific training. It has a role, but it should be after the acquisition of a core foundation. We also absolutely must force students out of their comfort zones often. They need to deal with new software, new subject matter, new styles, real time constraints that test them. And we also need to employ instructors with both experience in the industry and the ability to teach. These are two different skill sets. A great professional does not guarantee you'll be a great teacher, just as much as being a good staff artist doesn't mean you'll be a great art director. It's increasingly hard to find artists with the talent and skill to move beyond their established comfort zones, making it expensive and difficult to keep an otherwise talented team member. The suggestion inherent in this talk is not to do away with the integral role of the specialist, but rather to redirect our focus in our education and hiring practices, to move away from producing an army of specialists all vying for the same types of jobs, and instead provide a more balanced talent pool. I'm suggesting a model where the core art team is comprised primarily of generalists. We would continue hiring specialists for areas where a high level of skill and experience is needed. This pool of a specialist would come from experienced developers. So, there are benefits to having a core team of generalists. Having a team of generalists could help contain costs and control scope, both of which are going to become increasingly more important to the types of games we see being successfully brought to market. You also decrease hiring loops per project. Now, this is not to say that you can throw 80 hours per artist per week. It also creates a naturally more cohesive art vision for the game, since there's less opportunity for compartmentalization. It will also be easier to maintain a clear sense of the design intention. The more problem solvers you have involved, the greater potential for finding creative solutions to limitations. Instead of limitations becoming walls that limit us, they become ingredients that we cook with. The art of the game will be more akin to a family-cooked meal, each artist adding their own spice, taking turns stirring and sautéing, creating a complex flavor. I'd prefer this to a franchised recipe. If we are looking at a shift in our industry, it's worth revisiting and reevaluating those skills we deem valuable to our development process. Now, thank you for bearing with me. I know it's a long, kind of dry talk. But I have a lot more information that I had to cull from this, and I plan on taking it and putting it into an article. And if anyone's interested, you can feel free to email me, and I'll be happy to provide it to you. And these are some of the resources that I've used. And thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of the talks. So.